Welcome to the Vengeance Demon Hunter Mythic Plus Talent Guide. There are some basic talents I'm not going to go too deep into. If you have specific questions, post them in the comments below. This guide will be broken up into two segments, the generic Demon Hunter tree and the Vengeance tree. This guide is for level 70 Demon Hunters, so we have all talent points available to us. This build is more of an offensive build, so you'll be a bit squishier than if you went full defensive. If you are pushing keys, a full defensive build might be an option depending on how high you are going and your gear level. The first talent of note is Improved Disrupt. It adds 15 yards to your interrupt, which can be the difference between a wipe or not. Definitely a valuable talent. The next talent to discuss is Charred Warblades. While it may seem like a pretty bland talent at first glance, Demon Hunters are one of the most self-sustaining tanks out there right now, and this talent has great synergy not only with Sigil of Flame, but Immolation Aura, which is a major part of this build. Fire damage is a huge part of the damage we deal, and healing for even a small amount like 5% is a big deal. Moving on down, we have Rush of Chaos, which is pretty self-explanatory. Metamorphosis is our big cooldown, and having it up every 3 minutes instead of every 4 is a pretty big deal. Infernal Armor is another Immolation Aura buff. It increases our armor and deals damage to melee attackers. Demonic is pretty important as well. It causes Fell Devastation to trigger a 6-second metamorphosis after it finishes. Fell Devastation is on a 1-minute cooldown, giving us a 6-second meta every 60 seconds. That lines up exceptionally well if you plan your pulls around it. It gives big AoE bursts to grab aggro, as well as making you pretty tanky on the pull. Everything else is pretty basic in this tree. Most of it is cooldown reduction and improving on our basic Demon Hunter abilities. The one exception to this is the Hunt. It is extremely versatile. It has a 50-yard range, giving you another strong movement ability. It deals tons of damage not only to your target, but also up to 5 enemies in your path with a damage over time ability. Finally, it heals you for 50% of the damage you deal to the hunt target for 30 seconds. It's a huge spell that can be used in a multitude of ways. Next up is a Vengeance talent tree. This is where we get into the nuts and bolts of how we want to play in dungeons. First up, we have Frailty. This is a passive ability, so you don't have to worry about pushing a button for it. We take 4 abilities that work with Frailty in the tree, which should tell you how big of a talent it really is. It heals you, it reduces damage taken, it's awesome. A bit down the tree, we have Spirit Bomb. This is the granddaddy of our kit in dungeons. It uses soul fragments to power an explosion, dealing large amounts of damage to nearby enemies, and deals more damage the more soul fragments you consume, up to 5. It afflicts them with Frailty, which causes Spirit Bomb to heal you for 8% of all damage dealt to all mobs hit by the explosion. This is a massive talent that deals tremendous amounts of damage and healing. Next up is Fiery Brand. This debuff deals damage and reduces the damage the target does to you by a whopping 40%. We also take the complementary talent Fiery Demise a bit further down the tree, which increases fire damage you deal by 40%. We also take Down in Flames, which reduces the cooldown and gives you an additional charge. Along with Burning Alive, which spreads Fiery Brand to a nearby enemy every 2 seconds, that means casting this once on a group is going to spread up to 5 enemies during its 10-second duration. With the shortened cooldown and second charge, it's going to be used pretty much on cooldown. On the more defensive side, we have Calcified Spikes. This talent gives you 10% reduced damage after Demon Spikes ends. With the Extended Spikes talent making Demon Spikes last 2 seconds longer, you can have almost 100% uptime on some form of melee damage reduction between Demon Spikes, letting Calcified Spikes go to the full duration, then casting Demon Spikes again. It's a critical part of our build to keep Demon Spikes up as much as possible, and Calcified Spikes helps to bridge the gap between charges. Finally, we have Fodder to the Flame. It's a tough choice between Fodder and Elysian Decree. Fodder does pull ahead though, and it being a fairly passive ability makes it something you don't ever have to worry about. Fodder summons a demon that fixates on you and melees you. It hits like a wet noodle though. When it dies, it explodes, dealing AoE damage and heals you for 25% of your max health. Now, a Glaive Toss will deal lethal damage to the demon, and that can be done if you really need a burst of health, but it's not recommended. I recommend just cleaving the demon down with your regular abilities. In a nutshell, ignore it. That's it for the Vengeance Demon Hunter Mythic Plus Talent overview. I'm the Bearded Soccer Mom, and I hope you have a happy day.